Good Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Developing overnight, turmoil in Minnesota. Protests have erupted in a Minneapolis suburb following the fatal police shooting of a 20-year-old black man stopped for a traffic violation. We're on the ground with a live report as the third week of the trial of Derek Chauvin is set to begin. Shot surge. The U.S. smashes yet another daily vaccination record, with the White House reporting over 4.5 million doses administered on Saturday alone. We'll tell you about the supply concerns now mounting over one vaccine maker. Remembering the Duke as the rest of the world mourns the loss of Prince Philip, a small but televised ceremonial funeral is in the works for this Saturday. What we know this morning about the arrangements as members of the royal family comment on their loss. And interpreting COVID, American Sign Language interpreters becoming famous in their own right over the pandemic, accompanying state officials during crucial coronavirus briefings. With their own personal flair and presentation, we'll show you how Minnesota's top government signer gets her job done in a language all her own. That's a great story from your home state that you'll bring us.
Yes, I'm very excited to share Nick's story. She's absolutely amazing and stresses the importance of access for people who are in the deaf and hard of hearing communities.
Absolutely. And she's fun to watch while she does it. We begin, though, this morning with the developing situation in the Minneapolis suburb of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota.
Overnight protests erupted in the area after an officer-involved shooting. Police shot a young black man who then died. State officials say they are mobilizing the Minnesota National Guard at the request of local authorities. The shooting happened during a traffic stop Sunday afternoon a few miles outside of Minneapolis. This comes against the backdrop of the trial of ex-officer Derek Chauvin, which is now entering week 3. Chauvin is accused of killing George Floyd last year, a death that also sparked protests. Let's get right to NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster in Minneapolis. So, Shaq, let's start with that officer-involved shooting in Brooklyn Center. What do we know about what happened, and how are the community and the police there responding?
Well, Joe, good morning. Police say they were effecting a traffic stop yesterday at around 2 p.m. They say that when they approached the driver, they realized the driver had an outstanding warrant and he tried to get back in the car at some point. And that's when they say one of the officers involved fired his weapon, hitting the driver of that vehicle. Demonstrators on scene, the family says the name of that person is 20-year-old. His name is Dante Wright. You saw immediate backlash, immediate protests at the scene last night, and some reports of looting and demonstrations last night. According to one report, about 20 businesses got looted last night. We saw the mayor and the governor respond overnight. Look at this tweet from the governor. He says that he's monitoring the situation in Brooklyn Center, which, as I mentioned, is just about 15 minutes from where I'm standing right now outside of the courthouse. The governor says that he's monitoring the situation. His wife and he are praying for Dante Wright's family as the state mourns another life of a black man taken by law enforcement. We also know the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is also involved in this investigation. Another tense situation as, of course, the trial of Derek Chauvin is underway.
And you mentioned we know Dante Wright's name because his family spoke out near the scene yesterday. What are they saying about what happened?
Well, his mom was distraught. She was there in the moments after his death as protesters and demonstrators were gathering. She says that she got a call from him that afternoon saying that he just got pulled over because of some air fresheners that he had in the rearview mirror. She says that on the phone call, he asked for the registration information because this was a car that she just gave to him about 2 weeks ago. And she said that's when she heard an officer say, "Stop running," randomly. And then she said the phone call ended shortly thereafter. So still a lot of details that we need to know, still more details we need to find out. But we saw protests gather at the police station in Brooklyn Center. We also heard reports of shots fired in Brooklyn Park, which was about 5 minutes away from there. So still a lot more we need to know as the situation unfolds.
And Shaq, quickly, we do believe someone was in the car with Dante Wright, correct?
That's correct. We know an officer say that there was at least one other passenger in the vehicle. His mother says that was his girlfriend. She was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And then it's also possible, and this is another detail we're still waiting on, that his son was in the car. We know he had a 1 or 2 year old son who might have been in that car. His family is saying that obviously that is another element to this. Dante Wright now or his son now without a father.
Jack, let's turn to the murder trial against Derek Chauvin. So far, 35 witnesses have been called. The prosecution is preparing to rest its case early this week. How will they wrap up their arguments?
Yeah, we're expecting we can be just possibly hours away from the prosecution resting their case in this trial of Derek Chauvin. They don't give us an exact layout of who they'll call, but we know there was one witness who didn't get called last week, and that was the cardiologist. A cardiologist who will come and, according to those opening statements, will testify to how he believes that it was the Derek Chauvin and the physical restraints that led to George Floyd's death. We also know that we'll hear from the family, a family member of George Floyd who will come and take the stand at some point before the prosecution rests their case. We heard from our colleague, Reverend Al Sharpton. He said that family member was Phalonis Floyd. The prosecution is not explaining or not expressing exactly who that will be. So we do expect to hear from a family member of George Floyd. And then whenever the prosecution rests their case, we know that this will go into the defense. The defense will start making their case and start laying out their witnesses before we get to the point where a jury will start deliberating.
Lots to cover in Minnesota this morning. Shaq Brewster, thanks so much.
Another record-breaking weekend for the U.S. in its fight against the coronavirus. The White House says more than 4.6 million Americans were vaccinated on just Saturday. That number breaks a record set the weekend before. So far, more than 119 million people have received at least their first dose of the vaccine. About 20% of the U.S. population is now fully vaccinated. But there are supply concerns brewing on the horizon. Johnson & Johnson is sending out fewer doses of their one-shot vaccine this week. In fact, 80% less than the week before. This comes as states expand eligibility and some even drop residency requirements. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards is following the latest on the vaccine rollout this morning. Erica, good morning. Thanks for being here. Let's start with that Johnson & Johnson news because it will have a big impact this week. So only 700,000 doses of that particular shot are going out to states this week. Now, last week, nearly 5 million doses were shipped out. So remind us what's behind this drop in supply. How long is it going to last? And how bad do you think this is going to be for the rollout?
Good morning, Savannah. Well, you may recall a few weeks ago, Johnson & Johnson had a major manufacturing problem at its Baltimore facility. Workers there accidentally mixed up ingredients from two different vaccines, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. That affected 15 million doses of that J&J vaccine. Now, the company said it's sending in new management to that Baltimore plant. It will no longer manufacture the AstraZeneca vaccine. Now, how long will this last? It's unclear. White House COVID-19 coordinator Jeff Zients said that the company is on track to produce nearly 8 million doses per week by the end of April. And the company also insists it's on track to deliver nearly 100 million doses by the end of May. So we'll see. Savannah?
Now, let's talk about eligibility requirements. So New Hampshire and Oklahoma are the latest states to announce their opening eligibility for non-residents. You don't have to live in the state to get the shot in the state. So how's that going to work? And what happens if more states follow suit, especially as we're talking about this lack of supply from the J&J shot?
Yeah, well, it is widely anticipated that more states will, in fact, follow suit, joining many others that have already lifted residency eligibility requirements to get the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, this is going to impact a few key groups. Number one, college students who are from other states, also workers who travel back and forth over state lines for their employment. What's more, it will help undocumented immigrants get the COVID-19 vaccine. Now, all states have said that they are on track to meet an April 19th deadline to open up eligibility to any resident or anyone age 16 and above. Savannah, that's 1 week from today.
Yeah, wow. Erica, let's also talk about the rollout in China. Now, a senior Chinese official says the vaccines developed and administered in the country have a lower efficacy rate. Tell us more about that and what's being done to address it and if there are any international concerns there.
Yeah, that's right. So over the weekend, the director of China's Disease Control Center said that the amount of vaccine in each dose may need to increase, or perhaps booster shots will be needed. Now, those vaccines made in China have been rolled out to 60 other countries, so it has a wide implication there. Back in January, the vaccines that were manufactured in China were found to be only about 50% effective. Compare that to the mRNA vaccines rolling out here in the U.S. from Pfizer and Moderna. Those have been shown to be more than 90% effective. Savannah?
Erica, thank you so much.
The Senate is back in session today after a 2-week recess, and they've got a lot on their plate. One of their top priorities, the White House's proposed $2 trillion infrastructure and jobs plan. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now. Leanne, good morning. So President Biden will meet with a bipartisan group of lawmakers today to get the ball rolling on that massive infrastructure plan. What can we expect?
Good morning, Joe. That's right. Both houses of Congress are back in session this week for what's going to be a very long slog with and big goals of what they want to accomplish. Of course, that infrastructure plan. President Biden is having a group of bipartisan lawmakers to the White House, but it's a kind of random group of lawmakers. They're not necessarily in leadership, but this does commit to what President Biden has said, that he wants to work across the aisle to get some sort of bipartisan compromise on this infrastructure plan. But he's also said that he doesn't mind going alone with just Democrats if he has to. But this is the beginning of those negotiations, and we'll see if there's any sort of changes on behalf of some of these Republicans, Joe.
We'll be talking about this plan for months now. Now, Leanne, let's move on to the former president. Former President Trump is still creating shockwaves for the GOP. Even after he left the White House this weekend, he bashed Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell with some colorful and vulgar language that we won't repeat here. But how are Republicans handling his comments?
Well, this isn't the first time the former president has criticized Mitch McConnell. He did it in a press release before, and he's done it several times since the election. But, Republicans on the Sunday shows over the weekend, they said that this is not helpful. The Republicans are trying to unify the party moving ahead to the 2022 midterm elections. And when the former president comes in and continues to try to divide and create factions within the party instead of focusing on Democrats, Republicans think that it's just another headache instead of moving forward and focusing on the Democrats, Joe.
Leanne, another headache for Republicans. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is facing bipartisan blowback for his alleged inappropriate behavior, which he denies. How is the congressman fielding that criticism?
He is doubling down, and he says that he is not going anywhere. He's denying all allegations. He says he's going to remain in Congress. Now that Congress is back, though, I'm really interested to see how Republican leadership deal with him. A couple weeks ago, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy said that he would only be removed from committees if he was in fact indicted. But the allegations and the controversy and the scandal surrounding Matt Gaetz continues to increase. And so it's going to be a lot of tough questions for Republican leadership, Joe.
Leanne Caldwell, lots to cover this morning. Thank you so much.
Touching tributes continue to pour in from around the world, remembering Prince Philip, who passed away on Friday, just 2 months shy of his 100th birthday.
In the UK, crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace to pay their respects to the royal family. Preparations are underway for a small televised funeral on Saturday in light of the pandemic and government guidelines.
NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now with more details on those preparations. Matt, good morning. So let's start with the family. What have we heard from them? Anything from the Queen?
Well, we haven't heard anything from the Queen directly. And of course, everybody wants to hear from her. We have heard from one of her sons, actually two of her sons. One of them conveyed her exact thoughts. Here's what he had to say.
My dear Papa was a very special person who, I think above all else, would have been amazed by the reaction and the touching things that have been said about him.
The Queen, as you would expect, is an incredibly stoic person. She described it as having left a huge void.
And there you go, hearing about that stiff upper lip. Obviously, the Queen is devastated by this news. We've heard this, but at the same time, they're keeping calm and carrying on. Guys?
Matt, what do we know so far about the funeral arrangements, especially considering that we are still in a pandemic right now?
Well, guys, this is another thing that you can file under any event that is going to be totally different from how it would be if it wasn't for COVID. This would have been an 800 mourner funeral, a huge event, probably with tons of people throughout the country gathering to watch it in various places to see the pomp and circumstance. Instead, that 800 has been winnowed down to only 30. And even Boris Johnson, the prime minister, has announced that he's going to be giving up his seat for any member of the actual royal family who wants to attend the funeral. So really, this is going to be about triage. The authorities are going to have to decide who gets to go, and that could create some kind of tension. Now, of course, all eyes right now are on Prince Harry, and we've heard from the Sun newspapers here that Prince Harry actually arrived early yesterday afternoon. We haven't confirmed that ourselves, but this is really interesting. This could give a moment for Prince Harry to try to mend some of the fractured ties that he has with the royal family. And of course, Meghan Markle, his wife, is still back in Los Angeles, where she's very pregnant. It's kind of a convenient out for what could be a very awkward situation in light of that Oprah Winfrey interview a couple of weeks ago. Guys?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see them back together, without Meghan, of course, but some of the family there. Matt, thank you so much. Now to a disturbing story out of Virginia. Video appears to show police pepper spraying a Black and Latino Army officer in uniform during a traffic stop. Overnight, the town of Windsor, Virginia, issued a statement acknowledging the, quote, unfortunate events and said that the officer who used the pepper spray has been fired. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has more.
Well, Joe and Savannah, good morning to you both. This incident happened back in December, but now that Army officer is suing those two police officers, saying, among other things, that they threatened to kill him. The shocking traffic stop plays out from 3 different camera angles.
Get out of the car!
Army Lieutenant Karan Nazario, dressed in uniform, pulled over by 2 Virginia police officers. Stopped, according to the incident report, because his black SUV had dark-tinted windows and no license plate.
What's going on? Get out of the car now!
Nazario, who is Black and Latino, pulled out his own cell phone to record the encounter, which escalated when officers told him to get out of the car.
Keep your hands outside the window!
My hands are right here. What's going on?
Get out of the car now!
Nazario is now suing both officers, claiming they illegally detained him, pulled their weapons, and threatened to murder him. In the lawsuit, Nazario alleges the officers shouted conflicting commands, at one point threatening that he would ride the lightning, a slang term for the electric chair, the suit alleges.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Can I?
Yeah, you shoot me. Get out!
Moments later, an officer pulls out pepper spray.
Get out!
I didn't do anything. Whoa, hold on. What's going on? Hold on.
It's like kind of watching a train wreck. It starts bad and it gets worse.
In the incident report, officers say Nazario was actively resisting.
You made this way more difficult than it had to be. If you just comply. Get on the ground! Get on the ground now!
NBC News reached out to the Windsor Police Department, the city, and the 2 officers with no response. In the incident report, one officer wrote Nazario could have faced several charges, including obstruction of justice. But the officer did not want to see Nazario's military career ruined by poor judgment.
What was it that made your client start recording?
When you're a person of color, unfortunately, it's safer to record. If he hadn't, we wouldn't have known what was going on.
Seatbelt off. What are you, special?
And guys, we're also hearing from Virginia's governor, who says that he's calling for the state police to investigate this incident. Now, there are 2 things to point out about this. One, there was a temporary plate displayed in Nazario's vehicle. It's something that one of the officers noted in the incident report. And secondly, the officers called this a high-risk stop, saying that even though he slowed down, he kept driving for about a minute, even after the officer lights were activated. Now, Nazario's attorney says that he was driving on a dark road. He wanted to pull over in a lit area, and so he kept going to the gas station ahead. Joe and Savannah, back to you.
Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather.
Hey, Bill Cairns, good morning.
You know, all my snow is gone, but now the grass is growing and I got to mow.
Oh, my gosh. You're not happy in, you're not happy out.
Which do you hate most, the snow or the mowing?
Whatever season I'm in.
Don't complain, Bill.
I'll leave it at that. Yeah, I know. I will complain, and I will complain often, but I do enjoy the process. So let's get into this forecast. We did have a rainy weekend in some areas of the country. We had those severe weather on Saturday in the south, a lot of huge hail reports. We also saw the rain yesterday in areas of the northeast, and that continues this morning. Kind of a dreary morning in Boston, Albany, New York City, Hartford. Detroit, same thing, kind of cloudy with on and off rain, and that'll continue through the day today. Tomorrow looks a little bit better in areas of the northeast, but that stretch stretch of warm, sunny degrees we told you to appreciate last week, yeah, there was a reason for that because it doesn't happen often. And the week ahead forecast does show numerous chances for rain in the Northeast over the next 5 days. And there's even a little bit of snow on the map still. A cold blast of air coming down to Montana and North Dakota. A little bit of snow today. Tomorrow, some of that snow is going to be in areas of Wyoming and even northern Colorado. A little cooler and chillier in the Great Lakes, but at least it's dry. We will see a few thunderstorms. We'll have to watch closely. New Orleans, Mobile to Biloxi on Wednesday. By the time we get to Thursday and Friday, could be dealing with kind of a nor'easter type coastal storm. It's not going to snow, but we will be dealing with kind of rainy conditions in the Northeast. And notice, look in the middle of the country, another chance of snow in the Rockies. So, last week was kind of like, it's May already. And this week is like, oh, yeah, it's still April.
That's right. Those April showers. All right, Bill, thank you so much. See you in a little bit.
Okay.
Coming up, we'll take you to Michigan, where residents are seeing their 7th straight week of rising COVID cases.
Now, Governor Gretchen Whitmer is calling for, quote, voluntary restrictions to stop the spread. We'll tell you what that could look like next.
In the news this Monday morning, a volunteer search and rescue team saved 2 hikers stranded in a Utah canyon. The hikers began their climb around 4 p.m. Friday during daylight hours, but the rescue team said the pair could not find the route back after dark. The team led the hikers down the mountain using powerful searchlights. Both hikers made it down without any injuries. Representative Dan Crenshaw says he will be effectively blind for about a month. He's recovering from emergency eye surgery to treat a detached retina. The former Navy SEAL lost his right eye in 2012 because of an IED blast in Afghanistan. And history was made at Sunday's Masters Championship. Hideki Matsuyama is the first Asian-born man to win the tournament. He finished 10 under par, winning by just 1 stroke. It's Matsuyama's first major title. Savannah, I know you were watching.
I was watching, yes. Xander Schauffele, who was up there. Xander Schauffele went to my high school, so we're always rooting for him, but that was very cool to see yesterday. Matsuyama making history.
Congrats to him.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. Michigan is now considered the current COVID hotspot in the U.S. The rise in cases is mirroring what the state saw in November, but doctors there say it feels like last April, with some hospitals even canceling surgeries to deal with the surge of COVID patients. Michigan's governor has now put voluntary restrictions in place, hoping to bring these numbers down.
We are seeing a surge in Michigan, despite the fact that we have some of the strongest policies in place, mask mandates, capacity limits, working from home. We've asked our state for a 2-week pause. So despite all of that, we are seeing a surge because of these variants.
NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett joins me now from Lansing, Michigan. Maura, good morning. Now, Michigan's governor wants the federal government to ship more vaccine doses to the state because of the surge in cases, but the White House declined that request. Why is that? Is Michigan getting any extra help right now? Tell us what they need and what they have.
Right, Savannah. So I'm at a vaccine center here that's just opening today and has the capacity to do 3,000 doses a day. But the governor's looking for more help when it comes to vaccines. The White House says they're not sending any additional vaccines to Michigan as of right now because they're sending as many available doses they can across the country, and any vaccines that they'd have to reallocate here would be taken away from another state. They are allocating more resources in terms of support for testing and people to administer those vaccines. But the governor obviously really pushing for this call because she thinks that the vaccines will be really helpful in this surge. Some health officials, though, noting that the vaccines, even if administered today, won't start protecting people until about 2 weeks from now. And so they're recommending that they get a surge of those antibody treatments that some hospitals could use, since we're seeing a surge in hospitalizations. Regeneron, one of those companies that makes those antibodies, said that that's not up to the federal government. It's up to the state to order those antibodies. So I've been in touch with the governor's office to see if they are ordering more of those treatments. They haven't gotten back to me on that request as of right now, Savannah.
And Maura, as I mentioned just a moment ago, on Friday, Governor Gretchen Whitmer announced the state would go into a 2-week pause, putting these voluntary restrictions in place. Now, this is much different from the strict rules put in place in Michigan over the past year that caused a lot of tension in the state. Tell us about this voluntary approach. Why make it not mandatory? What's she hoping to do?
Well, first off, just a reminder that Governor Whitmer was stripped of her emergency powers by state Republicans here back in December 2020 after we saw all of that pushback. And so her power is kind of limited on that front. But she is calling for overall personal responsibility with this 2-week pause, those voluntary restrictions of recommending that people don't go and eat indoors, that high schools that are in person go back to remote, and school sports recommended to go on pause as well right now because we are seeing a spike in these cases among younger individuals. And so while none of these are mandatory, a lot of health officials, again, are saying people are fatigued of these rules, those mask mandates. They're getting more, tired of having to wear the mask even as people are getting vaccinated. So it's that overall fatigue, even as we're seeing the spike in variants, that people are concerned about, and they don't even know if restrictions will be enough at this point. Savannah.
And Maura, it's obviously so disheartening to hear that in hospitals, some doctors are saying the situation feels like a year ago. Tell us what you're learning about the situation there.
Well, it's the rise in hospitalizations again that's feeling like that deja vu. The cases are rising, right, week over week, but the hospitalization rate is what we saw exactly this time last year, again, among younger people rather than those older people at 90% capacity. You mentioned some hospitals canceling surgery. I spoke with the public health commissioner down in Detroit to talk about how she feels about this moment and what she's trying to communicate to her constituents. Take a listen to our conversation.
We are right back where we were a year ago. And I'm really concerned with what I've been seeing. I know, we've done this before. We beat COVID, but now we need to double down. We need to still practice social distancing and wearing our mask and washing our hands. We know what to do. We just need to do it.
So again, there's a lot of frustration because they feel like, Denise even said there, she feels like a broken record when it comes to issuing this guidance to people across Michigan. But more so, they're worried that this is just going to be an example for the rest of the country in people getting back to travel and being fatigued about the restrictions. And they want Michigan not to be a precursor for what we could see across the country, Savannah.
It's a pretty clear reminder right there that we know what we need to do. We just need to do it. Even if you're sick of it, we just need to hold on a little longer. Maura, thank you so much.
California is opening up vaccination appointments to everyone 16 and older this week. This comes as the governor of the country's most populous state aims to lift coronavirus restrictions by mid-June. That's if trends continue to improve. CNBC special correspondent Scott Cohn has more on how the state turned its pandemic predicament around.
Joe, Savannah, this is an important week for California as the state tries to fully reopen. On Thursday, vaccination appointments will be available to all Californians over the age of 16. And the state is moving forward now to try and fully reopen the economy by the 15th of June. So that's just about 65 days away. They're already getting going on that. Behind me is the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, which last year lost its peak season for the first time in 114 years. They are now back open again. They were as of April 1st with a lot of restrictions so far, limits on capacity and a reservation system. But those restrictions will go away in time for the June 15th reopening. And for the people at the boardwalk and businesses throughout California, the countdown is on.
Very confident that June 15th is doable. I think everyone, no matter where you are in the country, knows that California has taken the most cautious approach of any state in the nation to COVID recovery and COVID reopening. We all know that our vaccine progress in California is extremely strong. Our testing capability is extremely strong. The protocols we have in place are extremely strong.
Some restrictions will remain in place, though, including the state mask mandate. And there are a lot of things that still have to continue going right in order for California to stay on this trajectory. That includes keeping the variants under control. It includes people continuing to do their part in terms of social distancing and the like. And vaccinations will continue as long as supply remains where it is. Right now, 49% of California adults have had at least one shot. Roughly a quarter have been fully vaccinated, and that includes nearly 2/3 of seniors. So for California, things now going in the right direction. They sure hope it can stay that way. Scott Cohn, NBC News, Santa Cruz, California. Joe, Savannah, back to you.
Our thanks to Scott. And now NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar joins us. Dr. Azar, good morning. So let's talk about what we just saw there in California. Nearly a third of the state's residents are fully vaccinated, and they have one of the lowest infection rates in the country. Now, California plans to lift most restrictions by mid-June, about 2 months from now. This comes as this week everybody 16 plus can get vaccinated, so presumably quite a few more people will be by then. How does that timing sound to you?
You know, Savannah, it's always hard to telescope that far into the future because, again, we don't really know what kind of an effect the continued spread of the variants will have. I do like the fact that, Scott pointed out in his piece that there are all of these different variables and moving levers, right? Vaccines and variants and testing, he pointed out, which is still really important, restrictions and masking. So it's kind of like all of those things need to be moving in the right direction for them to, I think, have a successful opening in June. I do like the fact that, as of Thursday, the eligibility for individuals, all individuals 16 and up will be in place. And I do think that's going to make a big difference. I think experts do think that the vaccinations have made an incredible dent. I do have to point out, however, that they did reach a 60,000 death milestone this last week. So, still a lot of lives lost, but they're certainly heading in the right direction, Savannah.
So now let's pick up there with the 16 plus becoming eligible for vaccinations and talk about the supply issue here. Only 700,000 Johnson & Johnson doses are going out to states this week, down more than 80% from the week before, which was like 5 million. This one-dose vaccine has been key to getting more shots in arms more quickly. How much could a supply shortage of this particular vaccine set us back in the rollout?
Well, I think it's significant, Savannah, although, from what we're hearing from the Biden administration is that once Johnson & Johnson works with the FDA and installs a new management team at this Baltimore plant, that they will be able to meet their goal of 100 million doses by the end of May. And really by the end of April, get to 8 million per week. We knew this was going to happen when the news broke a week ago that there was a mix-up with the ingredients in this Baltimore plant and that there was, 15 million doses that needed to be discarded. But I want to point out that, Johnson & Johnson's big goal of having 1 billion doses by the end of the year, is very ambitious. So 50 million doses, while seemingly, of course, a lot, is still a very small percentage of the total that they anticipate that they will be able to manufacture and get out to folks.
Well, it's good news to hear that is hopefully just weeks away. And now, though, the U.S. did set a record in vaccinations over the weekend. That's some good news. More than 4.6 million Americans vaccinated on Saturday alone. And with all Americans over 16 becoming eligible by next Monday, we're hearing this happen in states across the country on this sort of rolling basis. But by Monday, that is supposed to be the case across the country. What's your message to people trying to make appointments as we deal with this potential supply issue and growing demand, and people are just sick of sitting at a browser, refreshing to try to get an appointment?
Right. So unfortunately, I think you still probably should be doing that. You're still going to your state's website. You're still, reaching out to your doctor's offices. You're still going to plan your vaccine, which is still a phenomenal tool to try to see where and when you might be able to get a shot. What I think that is what's different now that the eligibility has really opened up and it's kind of open season for vaccines is that people should feel a little bit more comfortable about reaching out to friends and family and coworkers and acquaintances and even posting things on social media like Facebook and Instagram. I have a lot of anecdotes from friends who were able to secure themselves a dose, all on the up and up. But now that people don't have to feel so self-conscious anymore, like, oh, I shouldn't be getting my vaccine. Savannah, you and I talked about that. Yeah. Everybody should try everything they can within a legal parameter to get their vaccine, Savannah.
It's a great point, and it's an interesting conversation, this sort of guilt some people were feeling about getting it before others. But look, at this point, especially as eligibility gets there, everybody getting vaccinated helps everybody else.
The more people vaccinated, the better. Exactly.
Exactly. And you reminded me of that. Dr. Azar, thank you so much. Always great to have you.
This past year has taught us about the importance of getting accurate information quickly, but access to that info is often lacking for those who are deaf and hard of hearing. ASL, American Sign Language interpreters, are working to change that, including one in Minnesota who has developed quite a following.
In a period marked by a deadly pandemic in Minnesota's hospitals,
without your
permission.
And by protests and civil unrest on the state's streets, Governor Tim Walz takes to the podium often.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you.
And is not alone. By his side, Nick Zapko, the ASL interpreter, who has become a bit of a celebrity.
Honestly, I have no words to describe it. At the same time, I'm thrilled that it's happened because it's brought recognition to interpreters and access.
What should people know about the importance of the work you do?
When there's unrest and events, it's critical that we get the information now and not later.
Zapko learned about the importance of access early. She was born deaf, growing up in a hearing family.
Friends and family would laugh at something that happened. I would ask what happened, and they would say, oh, it was really nothing. It was too difficult to include me. So I felt distant from my own family, and I lived like that.
That is why she's so passionate about ASL, which is a visual language that uses tone, inflection, facial expressions, which you don't get with just captioning at the bottom of the screen.
Minnesotans must wear a mask indoors.
So how does Zapko know what the governor is saying? She works with Patty McCutcheon, a hearing interpreter, who stands off camera, listens to the governor, and feeds that information to Zapko.
And then I take it and present an ASL for a wider audience that has many different needs, and I can better match that.
Here's a question I know you get a lot. Why are there two of you? Why can't Patty just sign?
As an individual who's deaf and has that native language, native culture, native behavior growing up, that formative experience puts the two of us together and makes the message whole. I cannot do what I see up there that Nick is doing, but I sure love it.
Those who rely on Nick love it too.
She has a tough job. She signs so clearly.
Including 16-year-old Jack Amundsen.
Why do you think she's good interpreter, Champ? Why? Because she's very intelligent. She's very smart.
Jack even did a school presentation about Nick.
I think for him to experience a level of independence by getting the information from the governor with Nick's interpretation, it just means everything.
Across the country this past year, ASL interpreters have been celebrated. In Ohio, Marla Berkowitz got her own bobblehead. In Georgia, David Cowan developed a huge following while pointing out he's not David Letterman. Back in Minnesota, Nick Zapko was working on her birthday this year when she suddenly, unexpectedly had to communicate a message about herself.
Therefore, I, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, do hereby proclaim Tuesday, March 9th, 2021, as Nick Zapko Day. Yay.
She didn't miss a beat.
Best birthday ever, obviously.
A day of thanks for a lifetime of invaluable work.
Oh, what a great story. Thank you for that, Joe. Coming up, the lasting effects on those who were inside the Capitol building on January 6th.
One congressman's battle with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's next.
Congressman Dan Kildee was one of many lawmakers trapped inside the Capitol during those deadly riots on January 6th. For the first time, he's talking about the serious physical and mental toll the riots had on him. As part of our week-long series, American Extremism, NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson brings us that exclusive conversation.
It's one of the most familiar and chilling scenes from January 6th. Officers, guns drawn in the House chamber. Behind the doors, the insurrectionists. Take your pins off.
Pins off.
Behind the camera, Congressman Dan Kildee, who was huddled in the gallery documenting it.
That was January 6th. Here we are 3.5 months later almost. What happened in those interim weeks to you?
I went home. I thought it was fine. It was after I got home and I started looking at some of the video from the event. I thought it was a few dozen people. It was hundreds and hundreds of people, violent people. And that triggered an emotional and physical reaction. I had a lot of tension in my chest. Breathing was difficult. I became really irritable.
You were feeling stressed anxious. You were having chest pain.
Mm-hmm.
A friend in Congress suggested Kildee reach out to the author of Transforming Trauma, Dr. Jim Gordon, who's worked everywhere from Kosovo to Parkland. Kildee called him, and the doctor immediately recognized signs of post-traumatic stress.
So I've worked in war zones and post-war, post-disaster situations, after school shootings and with war-traumatized vets. And what Dan was experiencing, as he talked about it, is what people experience. All the symptoms that he just described to you, these are all fight or flight that's being prolonged.
But they're supposed to go away.
But they didn't go away, and they have not gone away in so many people, and they're still there for people who have not attended to them.
Does it feel at all strange to you to be sitting alongside your therapist as a member of Congress, talking publicly now for the first time about your own mental health challenge?
Yeah, I mean, this is not something I ever expected to experience, not something that I anticipated, but I'm just really grateful that we connected and that I was able to get help when I needed it the most.
Their sessions almost every Saturday have helped, and so do the meditation techniques Gordon taught. The congressman hoping opening up now will help others do the same.
Most people who experience trauma don't experience it in real time on every network across the world. They do it privately, quietly, painfully, silently, alone. And so if I can speak to them, that's what I want to do.
Hallie Jackson, NBC News, Washington.
Another volcano eruption is quickly turning into a humanitarian crisis for the Caribbean island of St. Vincent. Cruise ships are being used to help evacuate residents. NBC News correspondent Kathy Park has the latest.
The island of St. Vincent on the verge of disaster after another volcanic eruption. The lush Caribbean island now looks more like a battle zone, with a thick layer of ash coating nearly every corner of this country, while the strong smell of sulfur hangs in the air. The Prime Minister described the ongoing crisis.
How bad is the situation right now? And would you say the conditions are worsening?
The northern 1/3 of the island, both on the east and on the west, covered in ash. A lot of homes are being destroyed by the weight of the ash. My home village, outside of my mom's house, the ash covered up to my ankle.
Roughly 16,000 have now evacuated the surrounding area, but cruise ships are now on deck to help with evacuations. Carnival tweeting, "We are waiting next steps from St. Vincent government on evacuation support."
We have to manage all of this during the time of COVID. We have managed the pandemic quite well. We have had only 10 deaths.
After decades of inactivity, the La Soufriere volcano has become more volatile following its first blast on Friday. This satellite image shows eruptions intensifying. Experts warn that the seismic unrest could last weeks. Kathy Park, NBC News.
Time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Bertha Coombs is with us today. Hi, Bertha. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Joe and Savannah. You know, last summer they came out when it came to issues of social injustice. Now CEOs are planning to make a new push on voting measures in several states. More than 100 top executives gathered on Zoom Saturday to discuss taking action to fight controversial state voting bills being considered, including the one recently signed into law in Georgia. Sources say the leaders from major airlines, retailers, and manufacturers discussed ways to show that they oppose the legislation. These include halting donations to lawmakers who support those bills. CEOs' pay surged in 2020. An analysis by the Wall Street Journal shows the average pay for CEOs at more than 300 of the biggest public companies reached $13.7 million. The average raise was nearly 15%. Salary cuts had little impact as the stock market's rebound boosted what CEOs actually took home, because much of their compensation is usually in the form of stock. And Alibaba does not expect any material impact from a record $2.8 billion antitrust fine by Chinese regulators. Beijing wants the tech giant to stop requiring merchants to choose between doing business with it and rival platforms. Investors shrugging off the news, shares rallying in Hong Kong today. It's not just an issue here in the States, obviously, the big control that these big tech firms have in their markets.
Absolutely. All right, Bertha, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bertha.
Coming up today marks 60 years since humanity's first successful journey to space, a major technological victory for Moscow over Washington.
But now in 2021, yet another space race may be on our horizon. We will explain next. It's not unusual for U.S. fishermen working off the coast of Alaska to see Russian vessels off in the distance. But lately, they've reported encounters of a different kind, Russian Navy war games harassing ships in American waters. NBC News correspondent Kevin Tibbles has more.
Here in Kodiak, Alaska, fishing is king. In fact, across the entire state, fishing is the largest employer, a multi-billion-dollar industry. So when fishing boats are way out there, and I'm talking about very close, nestled right up to the international borderline with Russia, fishermen get a little excited, perhaps even a little frightened, when they are buzzed by Russian military aircraft and find themselves in the middle of a Russian naval exercise.
This is the first time it's ever happened for us up there, that's honest. I mean, we've never, because we were fishing near a border, the EEZ, we were fishing near that line, we do see Russian fishing vessels on the other side on their side of that line, and that's not uncommon up in that area because that is a very active, very abundant, fishery area. So it's not uncommon for our vessels to see Russian vessels, not interact, but you see them. They're there. They're on. They might be 20 miles away on the other side of a line in the water, so to speak. So seeing Russian isn't anything new, but seeing Russian military, that was new.
Now, when the U.S. fishing fleet encountered the Russians, they obviously spoke directly to the U.S. Coast Guard based here in Kodiak. This is the largest Coast Guard installation in the United States. The problem, of course, that they're facing is that they are so far out, it takes several days, perhaps 5 days, for U.S. Coast Guard vessels to even get out there. But in this particular case, protests were filed with the Russians. The Russians did recognize what's going on. But as the Arctic opens, as the resources become more available, this is likely not the first time that the United States fishing fleet is going to encounter forces from other nations. Back to you.
60 years ago today, the Soviet Union launched past a major milestone in the space race and put a cosmonaut in orbit. It was a massive step in the race to the stars and a blow to the U.S. space program. Decades later, the U.S. and Russia are at a crossroads that could lead to a space race 2.0. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner has the story from Moscow.
After 20 years in orbit, the International Space Station is starting to show signs of age, and in more ways than one. On the Russian half of the station, cosmonauts have spent the past year searching for tiny cracks that have appeared across the hull. Meanwhile, here on Earth, political moods have changed rather significantly since the United States and Russia first launched their space partnership back in the 1990s. That spirit of reconciliation is gone, replaced now by a sense of mutual antagonism last seen during the Cold War. To get a sense of where things stand and where the Russian space program is going, I met with one of Russia's most famous living cosmonauts, Sergei Krikalev.
NBC News.
And to start things off, we talked about those cracks in the hull.
Is all of the work done? Is there more still to do?
Now we think that there are several of them, and total size of this crack is so small that we cannot even see it. It was our biggest fear that it can be a fatigue of metal, and in this case you can replace some pumps, you can replace some component on the station, but you cannot replace whole of the station. Our analysis and analysis of our colleagues from Houston showed that there is no metal fatigue.
Krikalev is now director of Russia's human spaceflight program, and it's a title that was well earned.
A space traveler landed in the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan today after 10 months aboard the Mir space station. When he went into orbit last May, Sergei Krikalev was a Soviet cosmonaut, but things changed a lot while he was gone. Among other things, the Soviet Union broke up, and Krikalev's hometown of Leningrad was renamed St. Petersburg.
And later, he became the very first Russian cosmonaut to fly aboard an American space shuttle.
Discovery on a bold new era of spaceflight between the United States and Russia.
And when the International Space Station finally launched, it was Krikalev who was on the very first crew to visit.
Station is built in such a way that if one system failed, usually we have backup, but even if backup fails, we have a different mode or different way of doing the same things. So I think station can fly beyond 2025 and probably beyond even 2028.
Not everyone in Russia agrees with this. Sooner or later, the ISS project will end, and talks are already underway right now about what comes next. NASA has proposed an international moon station called Artemis and has invited all of the ISS partners to participate. But Russia says it wants no part of it.
In our view, Lunar Gateway in its current form is too US-centric.
Instead, the head of the Russian space agency, Dmitry Rogozin, says that Russia would like to work closer with China's space program. Russia last month appeared to take a step in that direction, signing on to a moon project with China. The details are still pretty vague, but the proposal sounds a lot like a potential rival to NASA's Artemis project.
I have to ask, do you think Roscosmos is going to join the Artemis project, or is the future with the human mission with China?
The Artemis project is changing.
Of course, all the time, yeah.
So it's difficult to join the moving target. Even if we do something separately, sooner or later we need to help each other.
Do you think we'll see a Russian cosmonaut visit this new Chinese station?
Probably. For sure, we will do some experiments together. Maybe some of our equipment will fly there. Some Chinese can fly to Russian segment, so we'll see.
NASA might not have to wait too long to get its answer. Russia in June is hosting a major international space conference, and the Chinese are invited. Space officials here have suggested, hinted even, that a major announcement might be made then. For NBC News, I'm Matthew Bodner in Moscow.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.